He raised his glass and called me our family's dropout, and the room laughed because cruelty wears cologne. I stood near the dessert table, holding a white sugar jar with a crack running down its side like a fault line. The music was too loud, the champagne too sharp, and his friends, Harvard friends, looked at me as though I were proof of a story they had been told. I had left school once. He had Harvard once. That night, I pressed my palms against the cool ceramic and swallowed words that burned my throat. No one defended me, not even my mother, who folded her napkin tighter instead. I carried plates to the sink as if silence were a duty. Later, in my small studio with the space heater rattling, I set the cracked jar on the counter and opened a yellow legal pad. I wrote one sentence in uneven ink build, something that doesn't need applause. The street outside was empty, a single flickering lamp catching moths that never learned. My brother's voice still echoed, but quieter now. What did I owe to them, to him, to myself? The jar sat waiting, seam exposed, as if it knew an answer I didn't. Driving home that night, the tail lights ahead blurred into streaks through my windshield. The heater coughed out weak warmth, and my fingers trembled more from what had been said than from the cold. The word dropout rattled inside me like a coin in an empty jar. I pressed the steering wheel harder than I needed to, as if tightening my grip might silence his voice. My brother's party had ended in laughter for everyone else. For me, it had ended in silence. When I pulled into the gravel lot outside my apartment building, I sat for a long time with the engine off, staring at the cracked jar riding in the passenger seat beside me. I had slipped it into my bag when I cleaned up the dessert table, an instinct I couldn't name. It had belonged to our mother's kitchen, chipped long before either of us had left home. It was just a vessel for sugar, yet it carried every breakfast, every birthday cake, every holiday pie. Now it carried me. In my small apartment, the jar looked almost out of place, too old for the thin counters and humming refrigerator. I set it down gently, then sat at the table with my yellow pad. I had no plan, no map, only the restless need to write something down. My pen scratched out lines that were less about brilliance and more about survival. Problems. Messy schedules. Lost requests. Angry customers. The list grew under the dim light of a desk lamp I'd bought at a yard sale. Each word steadied me. Each note gave me a sense of control. The sugar jar sat near my elbow, silent but present. The crack was sharp, obvious, impossible to ignore. I ran my finger along it, thinking of the way people pointed out my own cracks, unfinished degree, failed attempts, temp jobs that never became permanent. Maybe this jar and I had something in common, still able to hold, still able to serve, even with the seam showing. Days passed, and I went back to my night job at the repair depot. The fluorescent lights buzzed like bees, and the floor smelled faintly of oil. My work was simple check-in devices, log complaints, match tickets to bins. Yet I noticed patterns others ignored. Certain parts failed again and again. Certain names kept reappearing. Papers went missing in the shuffle, leaving customers frustrated. I wrote it all down in my notebook, then tucked the pages into the sugar jar at home like folded prayers. The technicians were rough around the edges, but honest. They cursed about the broken system, about managers who didn't understand. I listened silent, absorbing their complaints. One evening, an older tech named Rita leaned against the counter, sipping stale coffee. She caught me scribbling notes and raised an eyebrow. "You planning a mutiny, kid?" I shook my head, embarrassed. "Just trying to see why things fall through the cracks." She barked a laugh. "Because no one patches them. Managers love reports, not repairs." She didn't mean it kindly, but it stuck with me. If no one was patching the cracks, maybe I could. At home, my desk grew cluttered with sticky notes, diagrams, and half-empty cups of tea. I had scraped together enough to buy a battered desktop from a thrift shop. I spent hours teaching myself breaking things and fixing them again. The glow of the screen became a quiet companion. I built a small script to organize service tickets, then another to sort them by urgency. They were clumsy at first, but they worked better than the stacks of paper on the depot floor. The first time it saved a technician hours of hunting, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pride. It was relief, like finding proof I wasn't what he had called me. Rita noticed. One night, she slid a slip of paper across the counter. A warehouse manager in another district needed help with scheduling. "He won't pay much," she muttered, "but he'll pay something. Don't waste it." I clutched the note as though it were a passport. That weekend, I sat at my desk for 12 hours straight, building a tool, rough but functional. It sorted deliveries, flagged shortages, sent reminders automatically. When the manager mailed me a check for $1,200, my hands shook. I brought it home, opened the sugar jar, and placed the folded slip of paper inside like a secret treasure. That night, I lit a candle and stared at the jar's seam glinting in the low light. The money wasn't just payment. It was proof that my cracks hadn't ruined me. I poured sugar into my tea, watching the grains dissolve. The sweetness was almost startling. The depot became my testing ground. Each time I improved the scripts, I saw workers grow less frustrated. They didn't know it was me. That was fine. I preferred it that way. I wasn't seeking applause anymore. I wanted steadiness. I wanted usefulness. At times, though, doubt crawled back in. On nights when I stumbled over code when nothing worked, my brother's words replayed like a cruel chant. Dropout. Failure. I pressed my palms against the cracked jar and whispered, "Maybe, but I'm still here." When bills piled up, when the landlord left warnings on my door, I almost believed him. Yet the work pulled me forward. Every improvement brought a small spark of hope. Each paycheck, though modest, proved that silence could be productive. One afternoon, I carried groceries up the stairs and ran into my mother in the hallway. She had stopped by unannounced, her hands clutching a brown paper bag of leftovers from my brother's latest dinner party. She looked around my tiny apartment, her mouth tightening at the peeling paint and rattling pipes. "You're still at that place?" she asked softly. "It's not much, but it's something," I replied. She sighed and set the bag on the counter. Her eyes lingered on the sugar jar. She didn't comment, didn't ask why I had it. Perhaps she knew, perhaps she didn't. That night, I taped the jar's crack with clear adhesive, as if sealing not just the ceramic, but myself. The next morning, I wrote another sentence on the yellow pad, "Keep building, even if no one notices." Slowly, the sentences piled up. Slowly, the jar filled with folded notes, checks, and scraps of ideas. My apartment remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like ground beneath my feet. I learned to listen to the rhythm of my own work, rather than the noise of others. And still, late at night, a question hovered over me like the hum of the heater. If no one believes in me, does belief still matter when it lives only in silence? I didn't know the answer. But I kept writing. I kept building. I kept choosing. The depot's fluorescent lights buzzed above me, steady as a reminder that life rarely softened its edges. I filed papers, logged broken devices, and kept my head down. Yet inside, a quiet urgency was forming. Every night after my shift, I returned to the battered desktop in my apartment, chasing answers no one had asked me to find. I mapped out workflows, rearranged columns, taught myself to stitch together small solutions that felt like stitching myself together. It was clumsy, yet it carried me. One evening, Rita leaned on the counter, squinting at me. "You're not just writing reports," she said. I hesitated, then showed her a glimpse of my scripts. Her laugh was short, but her eyes softened. "You might actually fix what they won't." She told me about a warehouse manager drowning in schedules, a man named Dale, who needed order more than promises. I said yes before fear had time to stop me. I spent a weekend building. My desk was scattered with tea mugs, sticky notes, and open manuals. The hum of my space heater filled the silence as I typed. When the program finally sorted deliveries without collapsing, I felt my chest loosen for the first time in months. Dale's check came by mail, a slip of paper for $1,200. I slid it into the sugar jar and stared at the crack glinting under lamplight. For the first time, it looked less like a flaw and more like a seam holding weight. Words spread in small ripples. A friend of Rita's needed help at a repair shop, then another at a supply store. I said yes each time, clumsy and uncertain but willing. The work filled my nights until exhaustion blurred the edges of day and evening. Yet I didn't resent it. Each small success was like adding a stone to a fragile bridge. My apartment stayed bare, but I began to feel less hollow. My mother called occasionally, her voice carrying unspoken comparisons. "Your brother just spoke at a conference," she said once, as if his achievements should remind me of my place. I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see. After she hung up, I looked at the sugar jar again. I had placed Dale's check beneath folded scraps of code notes. The jar was becoming a vault, not of sweetness, but of quiet determination. I brewed coffee, weak and thin, and sipped it slowly. I thought about the word dropout. Perhaps it was not a label, but a season, and seasons changed. One evening, while walking home, I caught sight of a neon sign flickering above an empty diner. Its hum reminded me of the jar of my own seam. Things cracked, yes, but they could still glow. Registering the company felt almost laughable at first. I filled out the forms in a corner of the public library, my laptop wobbling on a table scratched by years of use. The name came suddenly, Northline Systems. It sounded steady, directional, like a track laid out even when I still felt lost. I drew a crude logo in pencil, just 2 lines crossing, and tucked it into the yellow pad where all my half-formed notes lived. No fanfare, no witnesses, just me, a quiet desk, and the sugar jar waiting back at the apartment. My first 3 clients were tiny repair shops that barely stayed afloat. They had cluttered back rooms, invoices stacked in shoeboxes, and managers tired of losing track of orders. I offered them my tool, almost nervously, half expecting laughter. Instead, they tried it, saw it worked, and asked for more. Each late night, I wrote code in a folding chair by my window, listening to traffic whisper below. I added a barcode scanning feature after hearing a worker complain about losing track of parts. The moment he scanned a device and grinned because it saved him 10 minutes, I felt more seen than at any family dinner. The sugar jar became my ledger. Each deposit, first $50, then $500, then $10,000, was written on an index card and folded beneath its cracked lid. The seam glinted each time I lifted it, reminding me that broken didn't mean useless. I found myself whispering into the jar as if it could hear, "We're still holding." My mother called, inviting me to another event for my brother. He was receiving an award, something about innovation, though his company had more press releases than products. "It would mean a lot if you came," she said. Her voice held hope, but also expectation. I paused, then told her I couldn't. Silence stretched heavy and sharp. "We could go to the park this weekend instead," I added gently. She sighed, reluctant but yielding. That Saturday, we walked slowly through the garden paths. She pointed out flowers as if naming them could keep time from moving. She didn't mention Noah, and I didn't mention the sugar jar. But when I carried her groceries inside later, I caught her eyes drift toward it. She touched the crack lightly, then pulled her hand away. Neither of us spoke. At Northline, I hired my first 2 people. Mateo, calm and steady, understood operations better than anyone I had met. Priya, sharp and curious, built features faster than I could design them. We gathered in borrowed conference rooms, laptops crowded onto rickety tables eating takeout as though it were a ritual. I set one rule from the start: everything must be written down, documented clearly, so no one was left guessing. No heroes, no silent martyrs, only work that others could carry when someone grew tired. The culture grew out of our weariness with being overlooked. We refused to let anyone be invisible. A local business journal caught wind of us. The article called me a self-taught founder, which felt both true and insufficient. I asked them to change it to systems builder. I didn't want the Dropout label repainted with a shiny coat. I wanted a new name entirely. Meanwhile, Noah's world shimmered louder. His logistics startup appeared on panels in glossy magazines and charity galas. He smiled under bright lights while I sat in dim rooms debugging. Once on stage, he joked that he might buy my little outfit someday. A recording found its way to me. I watched it once, then closed the tab. Instead of anger, I felt a quiet resolve deepen. If he wanted to be noise, I would be structure. My clients didn't leave. They signed annual contracts. They recommended us to friends. Slowly, revenue ticked upward. The sugar jar grew heavier with slips of paper and folded checks. Each time I lifted the lid, the seam reminded me fragile, but holding. One night, after signing a contract that doubled our annual income, I sat alone in my kitchen. I brewed tea, placed the jar before me, and lit a candle. The flame reflected against the ceramic, turning the crack into a glowing line. I thought of my brother's laughter years ago, the word dropout hanging in the air like smoke. I thought of the silence afterward, the drive home, the empty apartment. That memory no longer hollowed me out. It fueled me. At a family gathering, he tried again. We sat around a table cluttered with dishes, and he raised a glass. "Our local genius," he said, voice dripping with irony. A few people chuckled, unsure. I looked at him calm and said nothing. My mother's fork clinked against her plate, but she didn't look up. Later, when clearing dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked older, maybe harder, but steadier. I carried the plates without trembling. That night, I wrote another sentence on the pad: dignity doesn't need applause. My days became filled with small victories. Watching Priya solve a bug before I even noticed it. Listening to Matteo calm an anxious client. Seeing invoices paid on time. These moments were quiet, almost invisible, but they stacked up like bricks. Each one laid a foundation under my feet. The depot days felt distant now, yet the memory of fluorescent buzzing kept me humble. I remembered what it was like to be unseen. I promised myself I would never treat others that way. The sugar jar remained on my shelf, never hidden, never polished. Its seam caught the light whenever I passed. To anyone else, it was junk, but to me, it was the spine of my story. A reminder that broken things could still build empires if only given a chance. At times, when exhaustion pressed down, I rested my palms against it, just as I had that first night. The cool ceramic steadied me. I whispered, "We're still here." And in the silence that followed, I believed it. Growth brought sharper edges. When a major distributor approached us with an offer, it looked like success wrapped in gold. They wanted exclusivity to lock us into their chain and keep us from serving the smaller shops that had trusted us first. The money dangled bright, almost blinding, yet I felt the old ache of being dismissed rise in me. Signing meant betraying the very people who gave me my first chance. I thought of the cracked sugar jar, how it held not just sweetness, but history. I turned them down. My voice shook on the call, but the words stayed firm. At Northline, our tiny team kept expanding. Matteo brought order to chaos, teaching us how to breathe during deadlines. Priya built with the kind of focus that silenced rooms. Together, We laid down rituals, every decision documented, every solution shared. No late-night heroes, no silent suffering. We grew not by speed alone, but by steadiness. A local reporter wrote another piece, and once again, the word dropout trailed behind me like a shadow. I asked them to replace it with builder. Not because I denied the past, but because I refused to be frozen inside it. Words mattered. Quietly, our revenue climbed. We landed contracts with regional distributors, nothing flashy but steady as a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Noah's company spread itself thin. Whispers reached me about leveraged bets, risky expansions. At a gala, he joked again, asking a crowd if I was ready to sell him my little toy. The video surfaced online, strangers laughing. I watched once, then closed the screen. He thrived on spectacle. I thrived on substance. Clients renewed without hesitation. Our retention rate turned heads in boardrooms that had never invited me before. Yet I stayed in my apartment kitchen, at night, tea steaming jar, glinting notes folded beneath its lid. I had no appetite for stages. What I wanted was resilience. Sometimes, my mother called her voice soft horn between two children she couldn't balance. "He's making big moves," she'd say. I nodded into the phone, letting her words drift. I didn't correct her, didn't compare. I had learned silence could be stronger than defense. Late one evening, after a release that nearly broke us, I collapsed into a chair. My hands shook, not from failure, but from the weight of holding steady. The jar sat on the counter seam, glowing in lamplight. Fragile, yet carrying. I touched it gently and whispered, "We're not done." The turning point arrived quietly, the way most irreversible things do. A client's warehouse flooded during a storm, servers soaked paper logs, floating like ruined leaves. Panic rippled through their calls, voices trembling with fear of losing everything. I gathered my team in the dim light of our office, and we worked through the night. We built offline workflows, patched together contingency plans, and by dawn, their operations were moving again. The gratitude in their voices the next day carried more weight than any headline ever could. That moment revealed the core of what we had built, not speed, not noise, but resilience. We leaned into that strength. I pushed us to develop a returns and repair visibility system, something no one else cared to solve. It looked dull on the surface, but it mattered deeply to those drowning in chaos. When we launched it, churn nearly vanished. Our clients stayed not out of loyalty, but out of trust. Word spread in careful circles. Our annual recurring revenue crossed 9 million, and for the first time, investors came knocking. I accepted a small, values-aligned round, not to chase headlines, but to strengthen our foundation. The sugar jar, heavier now, with folded notes, sat steady on the kitchen shelf seam, shining under each new deposit. Meanwhile, my brother's empire frayed. His company's glossy front cracked under scrutiny. A whistleblower exposed hidden fees, predatory practices. Headlines once praising him turned sharp, even cruel. One morning, my mother called at dawn, her voice unsteady. "He's in trouble," she whispered. The silence that followed was filled with echoes of old laughter, old jabs. I stared at the jar's seam fingers tracing its line and wondered what compassion meant when it was owed to someone who had shown me none. My team celebrated milestones with quiet dinners, bowls of noodles slurped in crowded kitchens. We marked each success not with champagne, but with the relief of still standing. I watched them laugh together, watched them carry one another without spectacle, and thought of how far we had come from the depot days. Yet even in triumph, I carried the question like a stone in my pocket, where does dignity meet mercy? Each glance at the jar reminded me things break things, mend, and the seam always remains. Rain fell in thin sheets the night I agreed to meet him. We chose a diner off the freeway, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted of burnt beans. I arrived, first ordered tea, and sat with my hands folded around the warm cup. The sugar jar's seam echoed in my memory, steady and unhidden. When Noah walked in, he carried the weight of failure on his shoulders, though he tried to mask it with a sharp suit. His eyes darted restless, searching for some remnant of the old power he used to hold over me. We exchanged a few hollow pleasantries before his words stumbled out. He needed money, not small sums, but something vast enough to bridge a chasm of debts. He framed it as family loyalty, as unity, as obligation. I listened, calm, the tea cooling between my palms. Once his mockery would have seared me. Now it barely grazed the surface. I opened my bag and slid a notepad across the table. His brows furrowed, expecting a check. Instead, he found a list job leads at companies still willing to trust him, the name of a financial counselor, an address for a modest apartment, and boundaries written in clear ink. No more jokes at my expense. No more public performances at my cost. Repay mother first. He laughed, at first a brittle sound. Then silence broke him. His shoulders sagged, eyes wet, voice quieter than I had ever heard. I'm scared, he admitted, the arrogance stripped away. For a moment, I saw not the star of Harvard, not the man who mocked me at parties, but my brother, human and breakable. I didn't offer to erase his ruin. Instead, I told him I would cover 3 months of rent directly to a landlord contingent on him following the plan. I told him I believed he could rebuild, but not on my back. His face shifted through anger, disbelief, and finally something like acceptance. He nodded barely and folded the paper as though it might steady him. When we parted, the rain had slowed the street lamps glowing against wet pavement. I returned home, set the sugar jar on the counter, and repaired its crack with glue. The seam shone brighter in the lamplight's silver against white. I left it visible, never hidden. That night, as I sipped tea, I asked myself if mercy could exist alongside firmness. The jar, holding steady with its scar exposed, seemed to answer. Yes. Mercy was not surrender. Mercy was dignity with open hands. Now, I sit in a sunlit kitchen, the morning quiet, except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. The sugar jar rests by the stove, its seam shining like a silver thread. It has survived move storms, years of doubt. It has held notes, checks, fragments of my own determination. It holds still. Northline has grown beyond anything I once dared imagine. Our valuation crossed 120 million, but the number matters less than the way we reached it, patiently, without spectacle, on the trust of clients who stay, because we never leave them stranded. Our employees share in what we've built. Their voices fill our office with laughter, their children's drawings taped to cubicle walls, their ideas shaping features better than I could have dreamed alone. I walk through those rooms sometimes and remember the depot nights, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the piles of tickets no one cared to fix. The contrast humbles me. My mother tends her garden now, hands deep in soiled tomatoes ripening on the vine. We share Sunday dinners that are simple and unremarkable: roast chicken, soft bread, a pie cooling on the counter. Those meals are more precious than any award ceremony. We sit together without comparisons, without shadow. My brother works a steady job in operations. The shine has faded, but I see in his eyes a quieter strength beginning to form. Our conversations are cautious, but not hostile. Sometimes he asks about my work, and I answer simply. I no longer need to prove anything. The word dropout has lost its sting. It was a chapter, not the book. Looking back, I realize the power of labels weakens when you refuse to carry them. Work done with dignity becomes its own voice. I never needed applause. I needed steadiness. That lesson took years to learn, but it is the seam in my own story, visible and strong. If you carry a name that never fit, You can lay it down here. You can choose a different one. I did, and in choosing, I found peace. The sugar jar gleams in the soft light crack sealed, but never hidden a reminder that scars are not shame. They are proof of endurance. They are proof of weight carried and still standing. My journey began with silence, with laughter pressed against me like a weight. It ends here, not in triumph shouted from stages, but in the quiet of a kitchen where the seam shines like truth. If this story meets you in your own silence, stay. You are not alone. Share your turning point when you're ready. And if you wish to hear more, you are welcome here.